as we saw, the problem that we ran into was that our app was acting like a naive bank manager that was giving out access to anybody that asked for it without actually vetting that they should have access. So we were going and getting from the internet any resource that we were asked to go and retrieve without really thinking about, does the app that's calling us have permission to access that resource? We were blindly taking information out of the intent that was sent to us and assuming that it was okay to go and get whatever information that caller was asking for without vetting the information in the intent or the sender of that intent. But in Android, there's a way that we can avoid these issues, these privilege escalation problems. And that's by ensuring that whoever calls our code has a specific permission. So for example, if your app is using the internet, or if a particular activity like our download activity is using the internet, we can also require that anybody that launches the download activity also have that permission. So let's take a look at how we do that. So here's the manifest file for the download activity that we just looked at. And it's a standard Android manifest. We've got an application, and then we've got our download activity here. Now, ordinarily, if you just add an activity, and that activity is exported and visible to other activities on the device, then anybody can send it an intent and launch it. And since we're not vetting the data in any way in our download activity, we're assuming that the caller was allowed to launch us, we're just going to go and blindly use whatever permissions or capabilities have been given to complete the actions that we need. But in this case, we're doing something special to protect that activity and prevent a privilege escalation. What you'll see is within our activity, we have this line requiring that whoever calls this particular activity have the internet permission. And what this means is that at runtime, if another activity or some other app sends us an intent and it's sent to this particular activity, if the caller does not have the internet permission, it will cause an exception to be thrown. So this is a really important way that you can protect activities that are accessing resources that they've gained access to through a permission. So in this case, we're accessing the internet, which was a resource that we got access to by using the internet permission, but we want to make sure that callers of us also have that internet permission since we're going to use it on their behalf. So this is a way of making the download activity safe. Now, in some cases, you may have the situation where your activity relies on multiple permissions or relies on some new type of permission. And in those cases, you can declare somewhere up in your manifest file a new particular permission that you want callers to have. So for example, let's say that you have a custom service that allows people to buy things on the internet, and you want to be able to accept intents that allow callers to add things to your buyer's shopping cart. Well, in that case, you're about to do something. You're going to expose a service that could potentially cause the owner of the device to be charged money, so you'd want to create a new permission for that. And then in the activity where you actually added things to the cart, or the service where you added things to the cart, you'd want to add that permission in to make sure that anyone that called you and asked you to add something to the cart, they had told the user that they were going to do that and had gotten sign-off and approval to have those permissions. So it's really, really important that whenever you build activities, services, broadcast receivers, content providers, that you safeguard the resources, the permissions that you've been given, and don't leak them to other applications. And there's all kinds of different ways you can do it. But the way that you can protect yourself is by ensuring that anyone that calls you has the appropriate permission, and that they have at least as many permissions as your activity requires to perform that particular service. Any of our application components, ranging from activities to services to broadcast receivers to content providers, could potentially be the source of a privilege escalation. So although we've looked at protecting activities, you should also be cognizant that all of the same techniques apply to the other components in your application, the broadcast receivers, the services, whether they're unbound or bound, the content providers. And just like we did with the activities, we can still protect each of these individual components of our application. We simply need to go and look at each individual component, see what the permissions are that it needs to carry out the services that it's performing, or see the sensitivity of the services and the information that that application component is working with, and then make a decision about what permission should be used to protect that service. And then whatever permission we decide on, we can, just as we did with the activity, add that permission to that particular component of our application in order to protect it. So just because we create a component in our application doesn't mean that we have to leave it unprotected. Anything we create can then later be protected with a permission in the manifest file. Similarly, if, for example, you programmatically create a broadcast receiver, there is code that can be used to actually add that permission to the broadcast receiver when it's registered to ensure that that broadcast receiver only gets invoked if the caller has the appropriate permission. So whenever you're building your different application components, particularly application components that are designed to interact with other apps and services, it's very important that we protect them with the appropriate permissions so that our app doesn't become the equivalent of that naive bank manager who starts handing out access to the vault and all of the money and other secrets stored inside that bank manager has been given access to. We want to protect and ensure that whoever gets access to that vault, whoever gets access to the information or services that we've gained access to through permissions, also has the appropriate permissions to operate on that data or to take the actions that are being exposed by those services.